Welcome back to the Psychedelic Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, David Flores, CEO of Global Track Solutions. And with me here today is Joshua White. He is the co-founder and director of Fireside Project, the first psychedelic peer support line. Joshua, it is a pleasure to have you here with me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David, and it's an honor to be here with you. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you on. And of course, it's full disclosure here, us here at Global Track Solutions and Psychedelic Spotlight are very proud sponsors of Fireside Project. It's a wonderful cause, and I'm really looking forward to discussing and talking about it a lot more here. But with that, Josh, you want to give us sort of an overview and an introduction to Fireside Project, how it came about, and how the Psychedelic Peer Support Line all came together and how that all came about?
Sure. Fireside Project is a nonprofit that operates the Psychedelic Peer Support Line. We launched on April 14th, and we provide free, confidential, emotional support by phone and text message to a few different categories of people. We support people who are in the midst of psychedelic experiences. We support people who are trip sitting for others. So let's say your friend is having a challenging trip and you're providing support to them. You could reach out to us. We also provide support to people who are integrating past trips, whether that trip happened yesterday or 25 years ago. Sometimes it's nice to be able to connect with an anonymous peer who can help you process what's been coming up for you. And we also support people who themselves provide psychedelic support to others. So that could be therapists who are going through FDA clinical trials. The experience of providing psychedelic peer support can be so beautiful, and it can also be really draining. And so we want to support the healers. Fireside Project kind of came into being in October 2020, but the idea really came about in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder and during the horrible fires in San Francisco and the rest of the West Coast of the United States last year. And I was sitting around my apartment feeling very depressed, like so many people were, and feeling like the world was just headed in a terrible direction, and that I really felt like I needed to do something to really have as much of an impact as I possibly could on the world. And so I started having my own psychedelic experiences probably about 15 years ago. And I knew from the very beginning that they were just so powerful, that the healing potential of these medicines would really have the potential to change the world. I was also very fortunate to be in weekly therapy for a very long time. And I noticed that the kind of synergistic effect that occurred between my psychedelic experiences and being able to process them with someone, that for me really unlocked the potential of psychedelics. And so many years ago, I was thinking about leaving my career as a lawyer to become a psychedelic therapist, wanting to really do for others what my own therapist had done for me. And as part of the exploration of that career transition, I had two very impactful volunteer experiences. The first was with the MAPS Zendo project at festivals like Burning Man and Lightning in a Bottle. And I really saw how just beautiful and powerful it can be, and really how alchemical it can be to hold space for someone as they sort of transition from this space of sometimes terror and of feeling very overwhelmed to a place of calmness where they can really turn towards what's coming up for them with curiosity and compassion and explore their inner world in a way that only psychedelics, I think, allow, or psychedelics principally allow. The other volunteer experience that I had that was so impactful was to volunteer for a nonprofit here in San Francisco called Safe and Sound. And one of the offerings of Safe and Sound is what they call the Talk Line, a 24/7 support line for parents with young children. The mission of that organization is to stop child abuse. And the idea behind the Talk Line is to really provide support to parents as they process some of the challenging feelings that can come up for them around having kids. one of the things that made the talk line so powerful was that we offered weekly follow-up calls to our clients. And this was something I'd never heard of before. I'd normally thought of crisis lines as just a place you call for on one-off occasions when you were about to sort of boil over. And these weekly calls were so powerful. Some of my clients I spoke to for years, and I noticed there was this powerful kind of health equity component. In the United States, so many people don't have health insurance, or if they do, it doesn't cover time with a therapist. And even though we were counselors rather than professional therapists, I noticed just how healing it could be to have someone deeply listen to my clients. And so fast forward many years, as I was saying, to the start of the pandemic, and I thought to myself, well, the psychedelic movement is what really gives me the most hope for the world. But the psychedelic movement is very homogenous in so many ways. That's for so many reasons, in part because of the war on drugs and related issues. So I thought to myself, well, I think that I could start a support line for psychedelics. I could model it off of the talk line where I'd worked for many years. This practice of weekly follow-up calls could revolutionize how integration occurs. And the volunteer experience of working on the peer support line could be so powerful, one of the best volunteer opportunities ever to exist. And so if in the psychedelic movement, and so if we could really prioritize building bridges with all parts of the community and really creating a culture of belonging where volunteers from all sorts of backgrounds feel welcome, and callers from all sorts of backgrounds feel welcome, then we could really change the direction of the psychedelic movement, especially if, as we do, we'll be hoping to offer scholarships to volunteers who come from parts of the community that have been historically marginalized, and so really create a pipeline of diverse healers over generations.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you mentioned, the pandemic, and you mentioned, of course, the very tragic death of George Floyd. And I mean, all of that points to what has been a very, very difficult, 12, 13 months for society and really humanity in general. You talked about that dread and sort of, this anxiety of feeling, where is the world going? And I think so many people, I think it resonates with so many people, over the last year or so. And so with that, there was an article that came out by Vice recently that really caught my attention. And I think it sort of ties into all of this here. And essentially the gist of the article really is just, that more and more people are turning to psychedelics for mental health care. And I think there's two sides to this. I think, one side is obviously incredibly encouraging. We understand where things are as a society and humanity right now. Of course, the other side is the concern, and recognizing how important responsibility and safety is when utilizing psychedelics. But with that, as I was reading that article, the first thing that popped into my head was, this is it. This is exactly why Fireside Project and their Psychedelic Peer Support Line needs to exist. And I'm so happy it now exists. Curious to get your thoughts on this, not, asking you to pick a side, whether you think people should be able to utilize psychedelics on their own, but, how important is it, with so much interest now, coming into psychedelics, how important is it to sort of have that support system and that framework in place, and recognizing that whether or not we want people to do it, they're going to do it no matter what,
I think it's vital to have a risk reduction tool like the Psychedelic Peer Support Line. What you just spoke to, what you just articulated, that is the essence of risk reduction. Meaning people are going to be engaging in these activities anyway. These activities have risk. And so it is the responsible thing to do. It is the right thing to do, to have robust tools in place to help people mitigate that risk. And we really see Fireside Project as filling that critical unmet need. And the timeliness of the launch of the Psychedelic Peer Support Line and the arrival of Fireside Project is just, in my opinion, uncanny. We came into existence only 5 days before the November 3rd election, when Washington, D.C. and the state of Oregon decriminalized psychedelics. Oregon, of course, went further and will be implementing Measure 109, which will create a regulatory infrastructure for psilocybin-assisted therapy. So and then of course, California, only a few days later, announced, or Senator Wiener announced that he'd be introducing a bill to decriminalize psychedelics, SB 519, which is really moving along. And so what we have here is really this kind of confluence of circumstances. We have there was already an international mental health crisis even before the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, exacerbated that mental health crisis. All of the measures of suffering are present and have gone up during the pandemic. For example, substance abuse, suicidality, anxiety, depression. In fact, towards the beginning of the pandemic, there was an article in the Washington Post about how a national emotional distress hotline saw a call volume increase of 1,000% from a year before. So we have people disconnected, isolated, and suffering. And that's all occurring at a time when access to these very powerful medications and very powerful medicines, which, although they do have significant healing potential, do have risk. And so that's why Fireside Project and the Psychedelic Peer Support Line are such vital tools now. You're absolutely correct that there is this fantastic research movement that's going on right now, and we're starting to really develop evidence about how healing psychedelics can be. But the Global Drug Survey report that the Vice article references talks about how people are still turning to psychedelics outside of a clinical context, outside of a professional context, and that can be risky. I think the statistic in the Global Drug Survey was that 4.2% of people, 4.2% of respondents to that survey who took psychedelics with underlying psychiatric issues or for the purpose of alleviating their own mental distress, 4.2% of those people sought out emergency services. Now, on the one hand, that's a fairly low number, 4.2%. But if you think about the fact that millions and millions of people across the world are taking psychedelics, that can be a lot of people going to the emergency room. That can lead to actual harms, and it can cost a lot of money. And so even though Fireside Project is not a substitute for seeking a doctor, right? We are not doctors. We don't provide medical care. We don't provide medical assessment. But what we do provide is emotional support. And I think very often what people need, especially when they're taking psychedelics alone and for the first time, when they don't have friends who know how to support them, what they need is a person who is understanding, who can validate the reality of their experience, normalize their experience, help them interpret their experience, and really just be a compassionate person. And I think this is a vital risk reduction tool at this inflection point in the psychedelic renaissance, the Western psychedelic renaissance.
Yeah, most definitely. And so, the Psychedelic Peer Support Line went live April 14th. As we're recording this, that's just a little over a week ago. But in that time, I know we were emailing, over the weekend, and you were talking about, how positive some of the responses you've seen so far coming from the launch of it. Can you share a little bit about, how things have gone so far and what you've seen, and what really has encouraged you the most since its launch?
Sure. So, first I should say, we're open limited hours during our pilot year. So we're open Thursday through Sunday, 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific time, and Monday, 3 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. You can also find that information on our website. So the following information is kind of not from 24/7, but it's from the limited hours that we're open. So we have been blown away by the number of people who have reached out to us, and also by just the wide variety of conversations that we've had with people. We've had more than 50 conversations in 5 full days that the line was active. By full days, I mean 12 hours. We had more than 150 people reach out to us when we were closed. Of those 50 conversations that we had, it was a mix of people who were in the midst of psychedelic experiences, people integrating past psychedelic experiences, and supporting others. So we were just, it's one thing to believe with all of your heart, as we do, that this is a vital tool. And then it's another thing to have people actually reach out to you in their moments of need and desperation, and to be able to provide that support. I think it's one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life. And I think the people who reached out to us really expressed a similar gratitude. One of the things that I was really, that struck me particularly hard is the number of integration calls where people expressed to us that they had tried reaching out to friends and family and even therapists and were pathologized. We're told things like, you just took drugs, of course you don't feel good, or even worse things like you probably damaged your brain by taking these drugs. And so this is trauma that these people experienced, and the effects of that trauma that were described to us were really just heartbreaking. And so I think it really affirms the need for something like this. And we very deliberately offer service by phone and by text message, because each of those means of communication have their own benefits and appeal to people, right? I think I'm 43 years old. Generationally, I prefer to use the phone, but I think younger generations may prefer text message, and so we want to meet people where they are with that. Also, depending upon where you're physically located at the time, you may not have the privacy to speak on the phone, or it may just be too noisy. And so we received some text messages from people who, it was just a very short exchange where someone just wanted to know that we're out there for them and that we're ready to support them whenever they need it. And that reassurance, that sense that you're not alone with your experience, can not only be just so powerful, I also think it can really actively mitigate risks, because there's support for you if you need it.
Most definitely. And you mentioned earlier, the mental health crisis that we are in the midst of right now. There's no question about it. I speak with Kelly Folkrod. She is the owner and operator of the Organic Mental Health Center down in Austin, Texas. And she tells me she's never been this overwhelmed in terms of having people reach out, seeking assistance, trying to schedule appointments. I think we are at a time right now where so many people need help, they need assistance. And so when the Psychedelic Peer Support Line launched, one of the first things I was questioning was, do you guys have the bandwidth to support, I think, what's going to be an overwhelming response and an overwhelming amount of people reaching out? With that in mind, and with you guys just really getting the word out right now with Fireside Project, what's the plan to really help solidify or strengthen, if you will, that infrastructure and the support line that you guys offer to ensure that you are able to connect with as many people as you possibly can?
I love that question, David. Thank you. The first thing is the demand for people wanting to work on the support line has been overwhelming. I think at this point we've received 260 applications to be part of our inaugural cohort, which currently stands around 35 people. So the desire of people to actually provide this support to others, I think, is just as overwhelming as the amount of suffering that there is in the world, and that's not a surprise. And we do have sort of a structure in place to actively ramp up as demand dictates. We, for example, will allow incoming volunteers to begin by shadowing current volunteers, so they can really get a sense of what it's like to work on the line. We've also really had an exceptionally experienced group of people that are part of that 260 plus people who have applied. So these are all people who have provided some form of support, whether it's working for the Zendo or other in-person psychedelic psychedelic peer support or actually being therapists themselves. Now, I want to be clear, we're not offering therapy and we're not holding ourselves out as therapy. This is peer support only. But really the people who are on the line are people who are highly skilled already with psychedelic peer support or with just peer support. And as I said, we're starting off with limited hours, but we have the sort of, infrastructure in place to be able to expand the number of hours. And we hope to do that, once we get our protocols in place. And then we also really want to offer this service to everyone in the world eventually. My hope is that no one in the world ever has to be alone with the psychedelic experience or the integration of a psychedelic experience ever again. And we're really putting the structures in place to make that happen.
Yeah. So the Psychedelic Peer Support Line is entirely free. I would imagine there are people out there sort of questioning, how do you make something like this free and how do you keep it free? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So we are a community organization. You think of supporting your local NPR station. We think everyone, should want the Psychedelic Peer Support Line to exist because it's truly an organization that is made up of the community and it exists to support the community. So we have several ways to really support us. We have a membership program where you can sign up to make a recurrent monthly donation. We send out anonymous post-call surveys that have links to make donations, and we're exploring different partnerships. But really, our hope is give a couple dollars if what's one of the things that's been interesting. I've had hundreds of conversations now related to the Psychedelic Peer Support Line and getting it off the ground, and I think that something like 95% of people, without a doubt, have said to me, I just wish something like this had existed when, and then there's always a story that follows. And so now something like this exists. And it can only exist if people just kick in a few dollars. Part of the reason it can be free is because of the amazing support of companies like yours, David. So thank you so much. And also, because really our model is to have this be staffed by volunteers, because we do think that this is, if you are contemplating a career in psychedelic healing, whether that's as a therapist, a psychiatrist, whatever, this is in my opinion, one of the best volunteer opportunities. And so we can keep our costs down. Volunteers get so much out of this because it's such a rich experience, and really the community does too.
That's beautiful. And maybe add some clarity here. So for volunteers, is there a call center or can volunteers work remotely from home?
That's a great question. Everyone works remotely. So Fireside Project is a 100% remote organization. That's another reason our costs can stay low, is because we don't have to rent office space. I'm coming to you live from my kitchen right now. And we have volunteers from all over the world. So even though at the moment we only offer our emotional support to people within the US, volunteers can come from all over the world. We have people working with us from Canada, the UK, Poland, and in fact, international volunteers are, because of the time difference, particularly well suited to take some of the late shifts, like the 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift, which is an exciting shift because you can really be speaking to people who are in such an acute need, but that can be a big lift for people in the US.
Yeah, most definitely. Last question here, Josh, before I let you go. Fireside Project currently really, the focus is on the Psychedelic Peer Support Line, which is very important. We've covered that here. Are there any plans to perhaps expand beyond that and incorporate additional resources as we continue to see the psychedelic community grow and interest in psychedelics only continue to, expand throughout society?
Great question. Yes, and we're actively, considering several options that I think will become more viable when the pandemic ends. We would like to provide peer support at festivals, festivals that the Zendo doesn't go to, of course, but oftentimes, as a former Zendo volunteer, one of the challenges is that you don't know all of the people who you're working alongside of, and sometimes just because of demand, you only can go through like a 2-hour training. We think that what Fireside could offer festivals is amazing, because we could have our volunteers who have gone through our 36-hour training, and many of them will have worked together on the support line. So we think that that is a particularly powerful offering that we'll be able to make. And our support line director, Adam Rubin, has basically worked at more than 4 dozen or close to 4 dozen festivals across the world. And so he's exceptionally experienced when it comes to running his own psychedelic risk reduction crews at festivals. Another thing that we would like to do is, public education. I think it is vital for people to learn how to provide psychedelic support to their friends. No matter how robust the research community and the above ground community becomes, I think so much of psychedelic use is always just going to be with friends. And I think we can provide education to people so they can support others. That directly feeds into our mission, which includes public education. And then related to that, we really see ourselves as, because we think that the call volume is going to only continue to grow, a really rich source for learning about people's psychedelic experiences. What are the lessons that we can draw from providing this type of support? And then as a community organization, we would share those lessons with the community, and it could really inform how other people support their friends going through psychedelic experiences. Just as an example, I mean, I've noticed that during our first 5 days, validating the person's experience, saying, yes, this is what you're describing is normal, and it's powerful, and this is part of what it's like to have a psychedelic experience. That's really been a sort of a through line on a lot of the calls, and it will just be amazing to be able to kind of share what we learn with the public, so that everyone can minimize the risks and fulfill the potential of their psychedelic experiences. And that's our mission.
I love it. And, I got to thank you again for, everything that you've done to bring this together. It's a incredibly important resource. And I think it's only going to continue to be even more important in the years to come. And on that, I want to challenge once again other leaders and other companies here in this space to get involved and to sponsor, like we have here. I think it's very important to provide that level of support for anybody out there who's able to. And we'll make sure we get the website information included here with this podcast. So if anybody has any questions or is interested in perhaps sponsoring, they can connect. If anybody wants to reach out to us here directly at Psychedelic Spotlight for that, we can certainly point them in the right direction. But one last thing, if for anybody out there, Josh, who has not yet entered the Psychedelic Peer Support Line into their phone, how can they do it?
Great question. All you have to do is enter the number 6, the number 2, Fireside. So 623-473-7433. And if I can just add one thing, David, which is, we can only help people if they know that we exist. And so if you're listening and you're part of an organization, please add us to your website, add us to your newsletter, really in a prominent place. That could be on your landing page in the footer. We have some shareable graphics that you can download straight from our landing page that provide this basic information. One model that I really love is Double Blind, the magazine. At the end of every article, they have a sentence that says, if you're looking for free confidential peer support during and after your psychedelic experiences, call or text 623-473-7433. And our hope is that sentence and the little banner that we created with that sentence on there will be ubiquitous, so that people know about us before they need us.
Beautiful. And I'm taking that as a challenge here for us here at Psychedelic Spotlight. We're going to make sure we get that added everywhere we possibly can, because it really is about getting the word out. So Josh, thank you so much again for taking the time to do this. Wishing you the best of luck here as you guys continue to move forward and expand with the Psychedelic Peer Support Line. And I look forward to having you back on again and touching on some other subjects and other topics. But thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. And again, thank you, David, for your support. You supported us and your company supported us before we launched when it mattered most, to really get that initial wind in our sails. And so thank you so much for doing that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, David.